Hello, welcome to Gardener's World. Now this is one of my favourite crops. It's purple sprouting broccoli. And I know that broccoli, we think of it as this green cauliflower. This is not like that. Purple sprouting broccoli is one of the great culinary treats that your garden can offer. And what you harvest are the buds of the flowers. They're small, they're purple, and absolutely delicious. And yet it takes ages to grow. You sow them in March or early April. I planted these out in July, and I won't begin to get a harvest until end of February. And then the season's over, and that's it for another year. So they take a long time, they take up quite a lot of space, they're big plants, you have to protect them from caterpillars. I know I'm not selling them really well, but when you eat them, you realise it's all worthwhile. These are amazing, amazing plants. They do need support, they're very heavy. These will get a lot bigger. I suppose the main thing you can say about them is they're not a lot of work. I won't have to do anything about them over winter, they're completely hardy, and once they're in the ground, they're fine. Now, coming up on today's programme, Toby visits a Japanese-inspired garden deep in the Welsh countryside.
How did you get the shape? I mean, the branches are all splayed out. Did you use wire?
Actually, I use ladies' tights.
We meet a gardener who has repurposed and recycled and upcycled to create his garden in Nottinghamshire.
I really love looking out for old doors, like this one behind me. I have a few dotted here and there.
Arit delves into the debate around artificial grass.
Love it or loathe it, it's estimated that 1 in 10 households in the UK have replaced their natural lawn with artificial grass.
Environmentalists say that this loss of land is adding to the biodiversity crisis.
And I shall be planting salad leaves for harvesting all winter long. Come on in, Ned. Good boy. This little bed has been filled with bearded irises for quite a few years now. And every year until this year, they have flowered gloriously from the middle of May to the middle and end of June. But this year, they flowered really badly, and most of them didn't flower at all. And I'd done everything right in the sense that this is a south-facing wall, this is very well-drained soil, masses of sunshine. But I think they've overcooked. The summer of 2022 was too hot. And I know that in the south of Spain, they bury them. They don't leave them on the surface of the soil because otherwise they get cooked. So I lifted them all, I've divided them, grown them on under glass, and now I'm going to replant them. I'm just going to sprinkle a little bit of compost onto the ground while I can. It's all right, stay there, good boy. And this is garden compost that's been sieved a little. Just because they like good drainage doesn't mean to say they don't need feed. Just lightly work it in. You can hear how gritty it is. Right, that's now ready for planting. So I've kept them in a very, very gritty mix. So if I take one out here, you can see, here we go. So this is the rhizome. And the fleshier and firmer that is, the more nutrition there is for flowers next year. And if it was going to be blisteringly hot, I'd want to bury this an inch or two below the soil. But I'm going to take a gamble that it's not going to be blisteringly hot. And all I'm burying are the roots, not the rhizome. And I've deliberately placed the rhizome so it's facing south. So it's going to get maximum sunshine. I'm just going to clean them up a little bit before planting, cutting off any dead material. I'm planting these now, but conventional wisdom is to divide irises, lift them, move them, plant them after flowering, which will be July. But if you haven't done it, it's not too late to do it now, but I would get on with it. Now, Toby has been to visit a garden, not so very far from here, whose inspiration comes from Japan.
Tucked in the Welsh hills is an exquisite Japanese garden. There's this ancient proverb that says, some people like to make of life a garden and walk only in its paths. And it could have been written about the creator of this horticultural paradise. Valerie Brown began to create Tranquility Haven when she moved in 20 years ago. So what is it about the Japanese style of gardening that you like?
It's peaceful, it's tranquil, and I love having to prune these beautiful shapes.
So it's kind of a meditation element is something you like, but also the hands-on, clearly.
Definitely, yes, I love pruning. Yeah.
How much of the garden was here when you arrived 17 years ago then?
It was just a steep slope coming down from the house. There wasn't anything here. Sheep netting all the way round.
And did you bring people in to do this?
No, I did it all myself. I did all the hard landscaping, all the planting. The only thing I didn't do was the roofs and the bridges.
A lot of gardeners would start with a master plan. Was that you?
In my head, lying in bed and seeing it, I could picture it, and then I couldn't wait to get outside and start on it.
Yeah.
And I still do the same now.
Well, I mean, I've only seen half of it and I am amazed. Lead on, show me the rest. Val is a builder's daughter, so that's where she learned her landscaping skills. Now, pruning is her major job. The thing that's really amazing is how much you've packed in, Val.
I know, it's amazing.
And you've done that via pruning, and
Yeah.
I've never seen anyone treat their bamboos like this.
This bamboo, believe it or not, has been here for 17 years. I cut out all the small ones. This one I wanted to stay small, so look what a lovely top you got on.
A tufty top on it, 'cause that's the thing, I've never
Yeah.
seen anyone chop the tops out, but they do.
Yeah.
You know those willow pattern plates? It sort of has
Yeah.
that vibe about it,
They
doesn't it?
do, yes. This is my pride and joy. My lovely little juniper tree was a tiny little thing in a pot when we first came here.
Now, I recognise this plant. This is Juniperus horizontalis.
Yes,
It's
it
the
is.
variegated form, and it's normally massive.
Yeah.
So how have you kept it in trim?
Keep pruning.
Yeah.
You see this here? That's a new bit. And that's a new bit. So just keep pruning, nipping a little bit off like that.
Okay. But how did you get the shape? I mean, the branches are all splayed out. Did you use wire?
Actually, I use ladies' tights.
Did you? I feel like we're getting under the surface of what's going on here now. Oh, go on, tell us more.
Because they're more gentle.
Ah.
They don't damage the bark. You've got to do it when they're still nice and bendy.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Val came to this house with her husband Dave, who sadly died 6 years ago. He absolutely supported her passion.
We went to the Amalfi Coast, which was Dave's last holiday. And we went into some woodland and came across this little old ruin. And
Yeah.
I stood looking at it. And Dave went, "Oh no!" I said, "What's the matter?" And he said, "I know what you're going to do when we get home."
Yeah, and sure enough. And so did you make sketches?
So I rang up the building merchant as soon as we got home.
Did you? And did you have photos, or is it all in your head again?
All in my head.
So were you and Dave partners in building the garden? Was he as interested as you?
Dave loved looking at the garden. He made the bridges, but he left the garden to me
Yes.
because he said, "I know what you're going to do with it, and whatever you do, it'll be lovely."
Yeah.
You know, and he just loved it.
He also ensured his bridges would stay strong.
Just before he died, bless him, he said, have the fabricators come and take pictures or film and have them copy them and do them in steel so that I wouldn't ever have to do anything to the woodwork again. And so that's what they did. They copied them exactly how he did them.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they're lost forever now.
What a solid legacy that is. Good man. Well, it's a garden full of love, Val.
It is. It is.
Growing acers in a new build garden like Val's could have been tricky, as they like old, rich ground. But there is a way to mature the ground, and that is by applying lots of leaf mould and well-rotted compost every year. Do it as a mulch over the ground, it'll lock in the moisture and then boost that soil life. This is one of my favourite varieties. It's got an awful Latin name. It's called Acer palmatum heptalobum azakuzuki. But don't let that put you off. I mean, it's a brilliant tree, fantastic vermilion colour, and Val's planted it in the perfect place. You see, it's in the lee of this birch tree, so it gets plenty of sunshine to ripen up the colour, but it's protected from the breeze, and it's mulched. One thing that Val has done really well is make use of borrowed views, bringing the landscape into the garden, and it's such an important Japanese garden concept. You see, what she's done, she's clipped the top of plants like this conifer, replicating the domed crowns of the oak trees and the beech trees in the distance. And you know they're huge, but from here, and to all intents and purposes, they look like bonsai in the borders. This garden is peaceful and beautiful, but it's also a work of love on every level.
Well, like Valerie, I love Japanese gardens and I love pruning. There's something immensely satisfying about shaping and training a shrub or a tree. Now, I'm pruning the lavender, and it's slightly contentious about when to prune lavender. How you do it is always the same. Just prune off old growth and never prune into bare wood. Always leave a little bit of new growth, which means that hedges always get a little bit bigger. But receive wisdom is that if you live somewhere where it's a bit cold in winter, it's better to cut it back in spring. And that's what I've done in past years. However, what we've found is that if you have a wet winter, the new growth holds the moisture and makes the whole plant wetter. And the one thing that lavender hates is being too wet. And you can get sort of rotten, dark, mouldy areas in the centre of the hedge. So by cutting it back, it exposes it more to the air and therefore can dry out quicker. So what I would say is if you live somewhere that's very wet in winter, like here, cut it back. If you live somewhere where it's very cold but dryish, probably on the east side of the country, leave it till spring. And if you live somewhere where it's warm, well, you probably have already cut it back by now. Lavender doesn't need good soil. It's a Mediterranean plant. Quite happy on relatively poor soil, but it does need good drainage. I was brought up in Hampshire, and the gardens there were almost solid chalk, and lavender loved it, grew really well. Here on rich Herefordshire clay loam, it's not nearly so happy. And in fact, the only way that this survives is because I put a ton of grit underneath it. Right, it's time to visit one of your gardens.
Hi Gardeners World, my name's Michelle and welcome to my garden in Huddersfield, West Yorkshire. When we moved in 4 years ago, it was an uninspiring place that I just didn't enjoy being in at all. My garden's not your typical looking garden. As you can see, I don't have a lawn. Instead, the garden is made up of 3 large beds that are made out of railway sleepers. In the last couple of years, I have grown only fruit and veg in these beds. However, this year I took the decision that I was just going to fill them with flowers, and I'm so glad that I did. Not only are they beautiful, but the amount of pollinators that is attracted to the garden is just amazing. and I just love it. Everything you see here has been grown from either seed, bulb or tuber, which has been a really cost-effective way to fill the garden with lots of flowers and plants. Grown quite a lot of sunflowers this year, but not only do they look beautiful when they're in the garden, but they're actually a really great food resource for birds. So as you can see, I've got multiple heads on the sunflowers, which is great because I'm getting more for my money with the flower. But what I'm doing is, as the flowers are going over, I'm just cutting them off, and these are really great to put out for the birds. I'm never happier than when I'm just pottering around my garden, picking flowers, sowing seeds and deadheading. It's my most favourite place in the world to be.
Well, I'm with you, Michelle. Pottering around in the garden is about as good as it gets. But I think you could say that I've been more than pottering here in the cottage garden. You may notice a bit of a difference here, because for the last 30 years there's been a big box hedge all the way down the path, and then beyond the box hedge is espaliered pears. But the box got terrible box blight, and the espalier pears were so cankered that they weren't producing any pears, and so we bit the bullet and taken them out. And it's completely changed this area. It feels much bigger, obviously more open, and instead of feeling like a loss, it does genuinely feel like a change for the better, an opportunity. Now, I'm not going to rush into changes, but to get this transformation right and to convert the cottage garden to a true rose garden, one of the things that we've started to do is not just take things out and get rid of them, but actually take plants out and move them. And now is a good time to be moving woody plants like shrubs or even trees. Shrubs like this hypericum can be moved as long as you go about it in the right way. So the first thing to do is to understand that you're going to be digging out roots and leaving a lot of root in the ground. So therefore, you don't want to take all of the top growth. So the first thing to do is cut back. So I'm just going to cut this back by half, which means it only needs half the roots to look after it. And the reason why it's a good time to move it is because the soil is still warm. And although there'll be no top growth, the roots will grow. Okay, that's a haircut. And I do that with any shrub that I was moving. The second thing is take out as much root as you possibly can. When you've cut round it, cut round the perimeter of the branches. Inevitably you are going to leave roots in the ground, but just get as much as you can. What I do is just try and work the spade in underneath, so you're undercutting. There we go. Okay. So if I can get this growing in a new position this autumn, it should be performing next year. Okay, pop that in there. Now, we're going to visit a garden near Nottingham, which has used recycled, upcycled, repurposed materials to brilliant effect.
Hello, my name is Andrew Clifton, and I live here in Nottinghamshire. This is my secret garden. Come on in and have a look round. When you're entering the garden, you come through a dark arbour, thick with trees and branches. You walk down the passageway, and it opens to a flowery vista bursting with colour. When I first moved here 25 years ago, this garden was just blank, nothing but a field. Then, 20 years ago, I started making the garden. In just a few years, the trees began to come up. I love trees, and they changed the garden's character. It had become a secret garden. Within the garden, I like to have different areas. I think that makes it more interesting. There's a shelter over there. In the far corner, there's a pond. And in the corner beyond that is the potting area. Each space has its own colour, its own flavour, and its own texture. I like using and reusing older, recycled materials. Old pots, or wood, or poles, I find they add interest to the space. They feel right for this garden. It has a vintage feel, and I like that using recycled materials means I'm not creating waste. I really love looking out for old doors. Like this one behind me. I have a few dotted here and there throughout the garden. They're genuine vintage items. The peeling paintwork reveals different colours, and I like to try and find plants and flowers to complement that. So, when I was still at school, I already knew what I wanted to do as a job. To be a florist. But the careers advisor said they didn't think I was suited for work in a florist shop. Instead, they advised me to work with my father building houses. I absolutely hated it. Then a friend of my mum's asked a local florist whether they might have any work for me. And so far, I've been working at that florist shop for 35 years. So, don't let people tell you what to do. If you want to do something, just go for it. I like to help the wildlife here. I grow cabbages just for the caterpillars to eat. Not for me. We really do need to encourage more butterflies. I just finished, a week ago, this wildlife pond. I'd been working on it for 3 weeks, but then I wanted to make it look more interesting. To look as though a tree had naturally fallen. I think it works. As a pond on its own, it was okay, but it just needed something extra at the back. I do like my potting shed area. The space helps me to come up with ideas, to create using different things. Here, whenever I think of something, I can just get on and make it. These tins I'm using are simply old food cans. So, I just leave them for a few months until they're rusty. That gives them a more interesting look. Then I plant them up with succulents. I rarely water them because they like it dry. And, of course, in the tins, when it's hot, they're very comfortable. This is my favourite spot. The afternoon sun on your face is lovely. This whole structure is only 15 months old. My father made the frame for me, and everything used here is recycled. It's all second-hand, so there's been no cost to us. I am proud of this place. Everything here is handmade. When I look round, I just love it here. This is my dream, to have made a secret garden.
I think Andrew's garden looks really good. And it just shows you that if you have a relatively small space and you pack it with all kinds of interesting things, different areas, different themes, different stories, not only does it look great, but it makes the garden seem much bigger. Right, this is the spot I want to put my hypericum into. Now, make a hole. It's a bit stony here, but it should be okay. Don't hang about when you do this. If you're moving a tree or a shrub, make sure you have the space ready for it to go to quickly. I think that's about right. Let's check. Yeah, not bad. Now, I'm not adding any goodness underneath the roots. All that happens is it makes the roots want to stay in the hole. It's important to firm it in well. And what you're trying to do when you firm it in is to make sure that the roots, all the roots, are in contact with soil. What you don't want are air pockets of any kind. And it doesn't matter what the weather is, what the soil's like, give it a good drink. So this is a couple of gallons of water I'm giving it, which will do two things. It won't just give it a drink, but also it will continue that process of moving the soil particles around the fine roots. Then, when that's soaked in sometime, either immediately or certainly over the course of the next week, give it a really good mulch of compost. Don't expect it to perform as well as it has been for a year or so. Give it a chance. Keep it well watered and give it a year or two, and if it's a tree, maybe even 3 years before it really starts to establish in its new home. But it will. And if you move it now, you should have every confidence that it'll be happy. Now, still to come on today's programme. Arit reports back from the debate surrounding artificial grass.
This is totally individual choice for a homeowner to be able to decide what they want to do in their garden.
It's plastic. We have the equivalent of tens of thousands of plastic bags laid on our garden.
And we meet two gardeners in Kent who have created a border to maximise winter interest.
I love seed heads so much because when I look at plants in the autumn, I don't see death, I see life, I see the beginning.
Come on, good boy. Up we come. It's been a really good year for tomatoes and chilies and peppers and cucumbers, but that's come to an end now. I could leave the tomatoes in, and some of the green ones might ripen, but they never taste so good when the weather is cooler like this. And anyway, I want the space to plant out my winter salads. But I will collect some of the green ones, which I could ripen in a drawer if I wanted, but I quite like them as green tomatoes because they make great chutney. And now it's just simply a question of removing all the growth in the beds. Now, in the case of these that are tied on, what I do is cut them up there like that, and the whole thing starts to come down. I will work my way through this, take everything to the compost heap, and that means I can dig over the ground and get ready for planting the salad crops. Now, for most of us, most of the time, gardens are a place where we can escape from the more contentious issues of the world. But some things can't be kept outside the garden fence. And at the moment, perhaps the most divisive issue of the lot is that of artificial grass. And Arit takes a look at the whole issue.
When it comes to gardens, lawns have always been divisive. There are those who mow and those who don't.
But in the last decade, there's been a new debate raging, a turf war in our gardens.
Love it or loathe it, it's estimated that 1 in 10 households in the UK have replaced their natural lawn with artificial grass. Some neighbourhoods have lost as much as half their garden space combined with a drive for parking. Starting out as a garden designer, I had used artificial grass in small gardens at the request of a few clients, but
Environmentalists say that this loss of land is adding to the biodiversity crisis.
so what's the appeal of artificial grass? Many want to ditch the mower, but for keen gardener and consultant dermatologist Rachel Morris-Jones, a love of sport didn't mix with a real lawn.
Basically, you've got very sporty kids, and they would come out and run around in the garden after school every day and at the weekends, playing a lot of football, and this destroyed the lawn. It was just a mud bath, and I spent a lot of time trying to seed it and grow it and returf it.
15 years with a plastic lawn, and Rachel has no regrets.
I can spend the time that I've got doing the borders, doing the pond, you know, doing the beds and growing vegetables and things like that. So concentrating on the planting rather than the actual lawn itself. We're all making decisions about whether we should fly on aeroplanes, whether we are using manufacturing goods. So I think we can all make informed decisions.
But not everyone's convinced.
Can you see there's absolutely no life in here?
Garden designer and campaigner Charlotte Howard has been digging into the environmental impact of plastic lawns for the past 5 years.
Normally, if this was a normal lawn, you'd see all sorts of little creatures. Absolutely nothing. Absolute desert here. What happens is, in order to lay this stuff, you have to scrape off the valuable topsoil, and then you replace it with stone. The topsoil is what holds all the organisms, the worms, it absorbs the water, it is vital. The main issue is this stuff is made from petrochemicals. It's plastic. We have the equivalent of tens of thousands of plastic straws or plastic bags laid on our garden.
Unlike a natural lawn, the blades in synthetic grass don't biodegrade. A recent report by the University of Barcelona found that plastic fibres from artificial turf are adding to marine pollution as a result of water runoff. And the RHS says studies show that plastic grass will contribute to the urban heat island effect in our cities as it retains heat, whereas real grass can lower temperatures when water evaporates during transpiration.
I wouldn't want any child or any pet of mine playing in this in the heat of summer. It's been proven now that it's 10 degrees hotter on plastic grass, and that's a conservative estimate.
There are a lot of other hard landscape materials that we use in our gardens that are also environmentally damaging.
All of those products can be recycled very easily. They just can be crushed and reused again. Plastic grass is incredibly hard to recycle.
The thing is that some people really want to use artificial lawn because they just want low maintenance. So what are some of the alternatives that people can think about?
If they do need lawn, there are other alternatives. I've seen clover lawns growing incredibly successfully. They're very common over in places like Italy, where there are lots of droughts. Clover does very well in hot weather, it does well in shade. There's always a better choice than plastic. I want this stuff banned.
Charlotte isn't alone.
The RHS have banned it at its shows, and the Society of Garden Designers have launched a campaign to say no to plastic grass.
The British Veterinary Association warns about burnt pet paws, and the Department for Levelling Up Housing and Communities is consulting on banning it on new housing estates.
So what is the industry doing to address the concerns that artificial grass doesn't fit into a sustainable future?
Anthony Gallagher runs one of the biggest artificial grass companies in the UK.
Ultimately, this is a plastic product, so how do you think this sits against the backdrop of a biodiversity crisis?
Well, I think it's very important that we get the end-of-life policy in place for this particular product. What the future holds is to make it circular.
Campaigners are saying that the recycling is a misnomer and it's basically kicking the can down the alley.
Well, I think they want to look into Europe to see the advances that are being made currently with the recycling and the reprocessing plants that are popping up, which are imminently going to be coming into the UK.
Anthony says the products have a warranty for 10 years and a ban would overlook a drive to be more environmentally friendly.
This is totally individual choice for a homeowner to be able to decide what they want to do in their garden. We will always try to encourage customers to introduce an element of flora and fauna into their gardens in the form of beds. It's going to make your garden look supernatural. And secondly, it also helps with the wildlife corridor.
But it's not without environmental concern, because some campaigners are concerned about the heat that it generates in the cities, the water runoff and microplastics.
Well, it does get hot, especially when you've got direct sunlight on it. With regard to the water, it's fully porous, so when it rains, everything drains straight through. The rain, it goes into the water streams below and finds its way into the rivers and the becks. Never have we come across anything to do with microplastics coming out of our products, not to date. But it's not for everybody. And if you can get the kids outside, why wouldn't you want to do that?
But new science is starting to show spending time in natural surroundings is better for our biology than synthetic materials. Professor Ross Cameron is from Sheffield University. His team have been studying microbes found in the air, near vegetation and soil.
Hi Ross, fabulous garden. You didn't have to bribe him with sweets, I would have come anyway.
The sweets are a metaphor. So you see the garden behind you and all the colour, and that's, as it were, representing not just the colour of the plants, but the colour of the microbiome around the plants, the natural bugs, the microbial communities that occur in natural or near natural type landscape. And you can see that's a really rich mix there. In contrast, if we go to a concreted area or a less natural area, a place that has less plants, we have a much less diverse microbial community.
This matters because studies are starting to suggest that plants benefit us not just psychologically, but physically.
We are breathing in this microbial soup. The closer we are to the plants, then we think that comes into our gut, which again stimulates the immunity, but also regulates our hormones. And it's our hormones, we think, that relate to our mental health.
Well, that is really amazing, Ross. If I were to have artificial lawn but plant around it, is that still going to give me some benefits?
It's a kind of proportionate thing, isn't it? You want to maximise the amount of life there.
Professor Cameron says the benefits plants provide go beyond magical microbes, and we should think about how our spaces are managed as a whole.
Plants cool the air by about 2 to 3 degrees, and they cool the surface temperature by about 15 degrees. Lots of small gardens come together as a big urban space, and so it's our gardens that are primarily our first defence against extra rainwater and flooding risk. They're also keeping us cool in the future as the climate progressively warms.
So if natural green spaces has a positive effect on us and the planet, is time up for artificial grass?
The Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs told us there are no plans for a ban. Its use must comply with the safeguards in place to protect biodiversity and ensure sustainable drainage. Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland have no plans for a ban either. Whether we use artificial grass or not, in the end, how we use our gardens is up to us. But if we want, we can choose to see them as part of a linked tapestry that benefits us and the world beyond.
Well, I think that artificial grass, like everything else in life, is complicated, and there's no straightforward, easy answer. Right, I have cleared away the tomatoes and the cucumbers and the chilies, cleared the space, dug over the ground, and that's important because it'll be compacted, having trodden on it, picking all the tomatoes, and I've just added a little bit of compost, and I mean a little bit. It's probably not more than about half an inch layer over the top, but that's enough. So I don't need to dig it in. All I'm doing is just slightly working it in with a rake, and you can see the soil is now nice and fluffy. Okay, now, this is what I've got. These were sown in August, so it's too late to sow now. If you can buy them from garden centres, that's brilliant. And I've got 3 brassicas here. The first are rocket, and then we have mustard. This is a red leaf mustard, very tangy, and mitsuna, which is a Japanese green. And what I have here are 2 varieties of lettuce, winter density and Arctic king. All these grow very well in cooler temperatures and lower light levels. They're absolutely ideal for an autumn or an early spring crop. And the protection of the greenhouse should be enough that they will see us right through winter. I'm going to start with some mitsuna. I'm going to go right to the edge, use every bit of the ground, and then space them about 8-9 inches apart. Mitsuna, mustard and rocket will regrow. If you cut the leaves, you get fresh growth, and you can probably get 3 or 4 cuttings from each plant. Now, it's time to visit another of your gardens. And this is somebody who has a passion for a flower that I'm yet to fully appreciate.
Hello Gardeners World, my name is John McGrath and I'm Professor of Dermatology here at King's College London based at Guy's Hospital, and I have a passion for research in dermatology, but I also have a horticultural passion. So welcome to my backyard in Kennington, South London, where I'd like to share with you my passion for these beauties, giant begonias. Big and beautiful, brilliant and big-hearted, bold and brash, brazen and buff. So how to grow giant begonias? Well, the main thing is to get good stock of tubers from a reputable supplier. I start them off, the dry tubers, in March, inside, and then in May, just plant outside and let them be. Really, what's not to love about these beauties? So thank you for letting me share my passion for begonias with you. Happy gardening and always look after your skin.
Well, thanks for sharing your big and bold and bountiful and beautiful begonias, John. Not quite sure I've reached the pitch of appreciation that you've got, but they're certainly very dramatic. Now, I do absolutely love quinces. I love the trees, I love the blossom, and I particularly love the fruit. Quince fruit doesn't fit any niche or category. It's not quite an apple, it's not quite a pear. They don't quite work in the same way that other fruits do. But what it does do, it does better than anything else. For a start, it's the best smelling fruit in the world. The fragrance is unbelievable. I'm standing here and the breeze is just wafting this fruity perfume that is intoxicating and just joyful. The second thing is, it looks beautiful as an object. You just put one in a room and it's a sculpture. It's a really beautiful, beautiful thing. And thirdly, if you cook it, it tastes fantastic. If you try and eat it raw, it's inedible. Picking them is like any other fruit. You need to hold them gently, like that, and then, oh, that came away without doing anything at all. These are all going to drop as soon as we get some wind, and the ones that are over the pond I can't possibly get. Can you see that there's a very fine downy coating? And I love the 16th century recipe for baldness is you take this downy coating and you mix it up into a paste and then you apply it to the bald skull in the hope that it will instigate regrowth of your hair. I have a feeling it never worked, but at least they must have smelt delicious. Now is a good time to plant a quince tree between now and Christmas. Plant it like any other fruit tree, but they will take slightly damper ground. So if you've got an area that's a bit damp for apples or pears, then a quince is your answer. And by and large, they're trouble-free. That's all I can reach for the moment. And you can see that I've picked the ones that are yellow. They're ripe. The green ones will hopefully they'll stay on the tree long enough to ripen. And if it's unblemished, that will store for months in a cool, dark place. We're now going to visit a garden near Sandwich in Kent, where the gardeners have created a huge, a magnificent border, which is just beginning to come into its own right now, as the rest of our gardens are starting to fade.
Autumn is my favourite time of year. It's that time of year when gardeners are thinking about shutting down for the winter quite often and relaxing a bit. It's also the beginning of the gardening year. This long border, it's a chance to experiment with herbaceous perennials, which we both adore. The other parts of the garden we've designed to peak at different times. In late autumn and early winter, the long border really peaks with its seed head display.
So the long border is that winter peak for us.
Hi, my name's Stephen Edney.
And my name's Louise Dowle.
Welcome to our long border designed for late summer and winter interest. This year I've been gardening for 30 years. A real milestone, I think, as a gardener. And my knees and my elbows and my back, they can stand testament to that.
Although I've always gardened from a very young age, it wasn't until my mid-20s that I decided that gardening was the thing I wanted to do as a career.
We met because Lou and I worked together in the garden where I was head gardener, and then it turned into a garden of love. The long border is 100 metres long and 6 metres deep, which might daunt many gardeners. The border itself is a rich tapestry of primarily herbaceous perennials with a few trees and shrubs and sub-shrubs thrown into the mix, even a few roses, even though I'm not a huge fan. I love seed heads so much because when I look at plants in the autumn, I don't see death, I see life, I see the beginning, that a plant is putting so much energy and effort into creating the next generation. And so I see beauty and I see life. I don't see decay and death at all. This is Baptisia australis, this is pink truffles. In the early summer, so May and June, it has a pink lupin-like flower. At the moment, it has produced its wonderful seed heads and is heading for its autumn finale when the foliage drops, and then it reveals these lovely big black seed heads that will persist because they're nice and solid and heavy all through the winter, and they have a lovely rattle.
For us, Baptisia is a much improved version of the lupin. The lupin's collapse after flowering and just leave a horrible hole in the border. So we use baptisias in replacement of those, and it comes in such a wide range of colours. So here we have Phlomis samia, member of the Phlomis family, commonly seen as Fructicosa and Rusiliana, and this one has a really impressive flower spike followed by the seed head. It's probably the tallest of all of them, to be honest.
The thing I particularly love about it is that it forms a whorl. So where the flowers have left the calyx behind exposed, you have a whorl, and then a short section of clear stem, and then another whorl, and it slowly gets smaller and smaller until you reach the peak. And so it's incredibly architectural. So there's something very satisfying about this seed head to my eye that I love to see in a border. So I wouldn't be without the Phlomis tribe, and particularly samia.
In the calyx, I can see that the pairs of seeds seem to be ready now to harvest. Just a little pair of black seeds in each one.
So we're going to collect a seed head. Now, obviously, seed heads are important for us for their architectural presence. So we don't want to go chopping all the seed heads off at this stage. So we're going to pop in and grab a seed head from the back. And then this is when we can have a tip upside down and we start shaking it out. It's nice to have some sort of container ready by, because often when you start to disturb a seed when you've cut it, the seeds will immediately start, if they're ripe, they start to naturally fall out and disperse.
Giving it a squeeze.
Yeah. Just
Gets a
trying
few
to
more out.
agitate those seeds out of the calyx. It's quite a satisfying job to do.
Oh,
there's a spider.
A little spider hiding in there. So this lovely seed head here is red auroch. So it's an annual that kind of just seeds itself around. I know some people are not keen. It can be a bit invasive, but we just weed out what we do and don't want. Early in the year, it has a lovely red tone to it, which fits in with the colourings in the border. And at this time, it's got all these lovely little seeds that have set all over it. And it's just gently threading its way through the border to weave it all together.
Yeah, and we're not afraid to use annuals that will self-seed into the border. For me, that means that each year, even though the perennials and the trees and the shrubs are all static, it means that there's a gentle movement and a gentle change through the annuals, because we then edit out plants that we don't want in certain places and we leave them in other places where we think they'll be beneficial to the overall picture and impression of our long border. As a gardener, if you're tidying up in the autumn, you're having to clear an awful lot of debris, but actually if you leave it alone, it will often decay and add humus into the soil, and by the time you reach next early spring, late winter, you'll find there'll be hardly anything to clear away and tidy up. But there'd have been lots of hiding places for insects then, and you'll have benefited the soil by protecting it and keeping it covered for the winter.
The worms would have taken down a lot of the leaves. The birds will come in and eat most of the seed. And actually, if you've got plants that are slightly more tender, it really helps protect the crowns by not cutting them back and exposing them, just leaving everything. There's always going to be tweaking and things to change, but we are really pleased with it.
It's not decay, it's beauty.
I too love the garden in winter. You get a perfect frosty day when everything is iced by frost, particularly the umbellifers. We have a lot of fennel here, and that is just fantastic. It's sort of covered with these dancing diamonds of light. The only thing I would say, and this is the difference in this part of the world to Kent, is that if you have day after day and even week after week of wet weather, which we often do in winter, everything gets very sodden and falls to the ground in this rather slimy mess and can form a carapace over plants and rot them. So what we do is, once plants have fallen, we do clear them away. Anything left standing, we leave. We don't cut back. And we do collect seed too. This is Crocosmia lucifer. Now I have to say I have never before tried growing this from seed, but I'm going to. Normally, we grow cocosmia from corms, but they will grow from seed. And if you collect the seed, sow them fairly quickly, certainly within a week or two, have them damp, put them somewhere bright and fairly warm, they should germinate in 2 or 3 weeks. The only thing to remember always is when you collect the seed of a hybrid plant, invariably it will not be true to the parent. Well, now is a good time to collect seed. And here are some other jobs that you can do this weekend. If you've got a climbing rose, now is a good time to prune it. Climbing roses, unlike ramblers, produce their flowers on new shoots. So the idea of pruning at this time of year is to go back to a permanent framework from which these shoots can appear next spring. Once you cut off any whippy new growth that appeared this year, tie in that permanent framework and replace any old shoots with strong new growth. The more horizontal it is, the slower it will grow, but the more side shoots will appear from it. Plants like acanthus, oriental poppies and phlox can be propagated easily by root cuttings. Lift the parent plant and choose the thickest roots and cut them off close to the base of the plant. Then replant the parent quickly. Reduce the roots you've taken to a few inches long, making sure that the bottom section is cut at an angle and the top straight across, so you put them in the right way up. Bury them just under the surface of a gritty compost, cover them over with more grit and put them somewhere sheltered so they can grow and be ready to pot on and then plant out next year. At this time of year, all our gardens are generating a lot of material to compost. And to speed up the process, particularly in the cold winter months, it's a good idea to chop it up in any way you can. Best of all is to mow it. Mow over it a few times, and that will speed up the composting process and dramatically reduce the volume. The Paradise Garden is still holding itself with a certain amount of poise. The Gaura looks very good. These are these white flowers. And it's not a plant that I put in this year. These are seedlings that have grown from plants, I think, planted 2 years ago now. They tend to prefer lots of sunshine and good heat. But this summer, which has had neither of those things, they seem to be absolutely fine and should go on flowering for another few weeks yet. And there's touches of verbena, a few roses still. There's still some life here. Just one disappointment here is the crab apples. We have in previous years had a really good display of crabs and now hardly any. I don't know why the crabs haven't been good this year, but they haven't anywhere in the garden. Never mind, win some, lose some. And that's it for this week. I'll be back here at Longmeadow next Friday at 8 o'clock. So until then, bye-bye.